Hello and welcome to MF Corner. I'm Sumaira Abdi. On the show today, how to judge a small AMC or one which is managing a small amount of assets but managing to outperform by leaps and bounds with Kirtan Shah, Chief Financial Planner at SRE. I also got a lot of requests to talk about REITs, so we'll do just that with Mrin Agarwal, a financial educator and director of FinSafe India. So let's start with our first topic. Now, some of the smaller mutual fund schemes have outperformed and how in the recent past. So let's take a few examples, right? I've taken direct plans and the returns which have been generated over the last 1 year as per the AMFI website, right? So let's pull it up for you. Quant AMC, which as of December end was managing overall assets of just about 450 crores, has figured 4 times in this list. They had the best performing large and mid cap fund, the best performing multi cap, as well as the rank outperformers in the small cap and ELSS categories. Canara Robeco, which is relatively much bigger than these AMCs with total assets of about 23,000 crores, but the best performing fund that they have, which is the large cap fund, and considering that the largest large cap scheme is well over 27,000 crores, their 1,500 crore rupees would make it a small scheme in comparison. PGIM India again manages total assets of under 5,000 crores but figures as the best scheme in the mid-cap space. So what is it about these smaller AMCs and their funds? Have they cracked the code? Should investors begin looking at these schemes more seriously, or is it just a flash in the pan performance? I invite SRE's Kirtan Shah to shed some light on how investors should judge these smaller schemes with outsized returns. Kirtan, Quant's assets, while still modest, have doubled in the last 3 months. Likewise for IIFL AMC. PGIM, ITI, BOI, AXA, they've all grown about 30%. Is it just that they have a small base, or are investors seeing value here? I mean, what's an appropriate way to judge the performance of a small AMC? Let's start with the equity funds.
So, Sumaira, in my opinion, honestly, there is no straightforward answer to should you or should you not invest in these smaller AMCs. Look, while the near-term performance of these AMCs may look very promising, I think that we should not really go away diverting ourselves with the basics of what you should look at before choosing a fund to invest in. So let me answer these questions separately. We'll take equity and debt separately. To start with, in terms of equity, now look, what I believe that a lot of us as investors go wrong while choosing an equity fund is looking at the absolute return of the fund in the near term versus looking at rolling returns. Now, what do I mean? Let me take an example of, let's say, JM Large Cap. Now, the near-term performance looks quite decent, where the fund has generated 20.7% over the last 1 year, whereas index is 21% and the category average is 19.75. So if you see that the fund has done almost as good as the index, but they are better off than the category average. Now, over here, the problem is that if you look at the absolute return, right, and try and extrapolate it, or rather look at it backwards, let's say how the fund has performed over 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years, it will actually not give you the right data point. Now, why do I say that? Now, look, if you look at the last 3 years of the same fund, right? So let's say from the 1st of Jan 2017 to the 31st of December 2020, now we will realize that in this period that we are talking about, it also has the last 1 year, which is the 1st of Jan 2020 to the 31st of December 2020. Which means while you look at even a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, or a 10-year period, it will always have the last 1 year data, which will influence the overall 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year performance. And this is exactly where absolute returns don't really show you the right picture, in my opinion. So what is the solution? If you really want to see if the fund has been really consistent over a period of time and not just over the last 6 months or 1 year, ideally we should look at something called as rolling returns. Now, while you do the same analysis of rolling returns on the same fund that we spoke of, let's say if you take a 3-year rolling over the last 10 years, you would realize that the picture completely changes. Now, the fund's average return on a rolling basis is 8.81 versus the index, which is 10.29. Right? Now, this is how rolling will actually give you a better understanding whether the fund has been consistently performing or it has performed in brief periods of time while you are looking at it. Of course, I understand the SEBI categorization changes and all of these things are broadly put to give you a perspective at the macro level. Now why I think that this same thing cannot be, categorized across all AMCs, right? Is because if you look at, let's say, Canara Robeco, the fund that you also spoke of. Let's say if you look at Canara Robeco Blue Chip Fund, now on the same parameter of rolling returns, the fund has done far superior than the index, the category average, and the fund that we are talking about. So point number one, in my opinion, don't look at absolute return, look at rolling returns, irrespective whether the AUM of the scheme is small or large, because that will give you a better understanding of the fund's performance than just the last couple of months in which the fund has done well. Also, Sumaira, we've understood the last time we were doing this show on alpha, right? That it's imperative to not only look at the returns of the fund, but look at the return that the fund has been able to generate with respect to the risk that the fund took. So another element, if you add on the same funds that we spoke of, now JM Large Cap has an alpha of minus 5.36%, which means versus the risk that JM's fund took, it should have ideally generated an X return, but the fund has given 5.36% lower than the minimum return generated. Now, if you look at Canara in the same case, Canara Blue Chip, it has an alpha of plus 5.09. Now, again, the point that I'm trying to make here is both of these are smaller schemes, but you cannot justify or not justify saying whether one has a smaller AUM, one has a larger AUM, and hence the performance has changed. In my opinion, the most important thing that we really need to look at is, does the AMC have a good investment philosophy? Is the AMC actually putting in a process for this philosophy in terms of investment? And most importantly, is the AMC actually implementing it with discipline? Now, you will have AMCs continuously keep talking about their process, philosophy in all their communication channels. And this, in my opinion, is extremely important. You might have funds which might not do well in certain phases of time, but if there is a defined investment philosophy, process, and discipline in place, I think that near-term performance not working in your favor can be definitely ignored. If you really ask me, long story short, we would typically look at funds which would have a minimum 5 years of track record for us to look at. We look at the returns and the risk parameters, and if that fits in our preview, then irrespective of whether it's a small AMC or a large AMC, I think it does not make any difference to go ahead and suggest any of those funds, in my opinion.
Okay, so AUM per se, neither attracts nor detracts in terms of how an investor should look at it. Is it the same for debt too?
Sumaira, actually not. So in debt, I have a very different opinion where, in my opinion, this analysis is applicable to all AMCs, unlike what I spoke of equity. So if you look at debt, okay, let's say a debt AMC or a debt scheme has 200 crore rupees. Now, if they want to buy into any particular debt issuance, a rough minimum ticket size of buying a bond would be, let's say, 10 crore rupees. So if a fund which has 200 crore rupees of AUM and 10 crore rupees is the minimum bet to buy a particular bond, I think there are two challenges here. The first challenge is that the fund will not be able to diversify, right? Is because 200 crore rupees, minimum bet is 10 crore. How many bonds will you really be able to buy? Which is why you will see higher allocation to certain corporates, and that, in my opinion, increases concentration risk while we talk about debt in the smaller AMC space. Now, again, what happens is because you don't have a larger AUM, you will not be able to get a better rate to buy the bonds from the market, and hence you will not be able to generate a higher yield as well. So to generate a higher yield, again, what schemes may end up doing is put more concentration in a particular corporate so that we can negotiate a higher yield with that corporate. So in my opinion, the first problem while we look at smaller AUM on the debt side is that they cannot diversify, and that increases concentration risk, and yields also, if they want a little higher, they will have to take concentration risk. Second, very importantly, Sumaira, in my opinion, and we've seen this happening in the past, that if a smaller AMC has, let's say, a default on one of the bonds that they've invested in, what would generally happen is redemption pressure would increase on that particular bond. And we will assume that the smart money would typically remove their money before a normal retailer would even understand that. Now, what happens is when redemption pressure comes in, the fund typically will sell the most liquid papers available to make good for the redemptions. By which what happens is people who stay back in the scheme will generally see a higher allocation to the defaulted paper, and the liquidity of the fund dries down because they've used the liquidity to make good for the redemptions. This is another problem, in my opinion, for smaller AUM schemes on the debt side. So generally, if you ask me, we would try and avoid investing in schemes which don't have 10,000 odd crore rupees of AUM because of the above reasons that I spoke to you of. Of course, one can argue that there can be exceptions for ETFs, like let's say the Edelweiss Bharat Bond or the GSEC ETF by Motilal Oswal. We can have these as exceptions because assuming that probably whenever somebody needs liquidity while invested in these bonds, they can go to the secondary market and transact, where investors are transacting between them and they are not actually going up to the fund house to get the redemption. So if you talk about ETFs, there can be an exception, but otherwise, largely a smaller AUM in debt is a troublesome area in my opinion.
Okay, I take your point on both equity and debt on board, but let me take you back to equity for a bit. I take the point that don't judge a scheme by AUM alone, right? But the point is, there are some mid-sized companies with, probably one scheme has a bulk of the AUM as well. There are, very, very big AMCs who also have schemes which hardly have any money in them. I mean, is that not a signal also to investors that perhaps that one fund manager really knows his trade, or, that one particular set of schemes managed by a fund manager is just not doing well? I mean, are those not signals for investors?
No, so Sumaira, absolutely. Look, you would see that larger AMCs, like you rightly pointed out, would have some schemes where the amount of money is extremely large in the scheme of things. But if you have to further break down equity, then the way I would like to answer this question is, let's say, for example, while we talk about a large cap fund, right? In a large cap fund, it would not matter realistically if your AUM is small or big, because there is not going to be any impact cost while there is redemption or there is not redemption. And it's going to be very easy for the fund manager to be able to park this money because the liquidity in the underlying equity is fairly large and available. But if you look at the same thing, while we talk about a mid cap or a small cap fund, that is where the challenge, in my opinion, is. So if you look at a large AMC, which would have a large AUM in a mid cap or a small cap fund, then managing that is going to be extremely tricky, even if you are a large AMC having large AUM. So in that case, it works out well in the favor of the smaller AMCs, where in mid cap and small cap, they have smaller AUMs, and hence managing those smaller AUMs in mid cap and small cap, where the liquidity is slightly lower, is far easier, better than the larger AMCs who have larger AUMs to manage in large cap and small caps and mid caps. So I think if you look at mid cap and small cap, then I would say smaller AUM would be able to do a much better job than having a larger AUM, because the impact cost of wanting to buy and being able to sell whenever you want to is going to be much easier with smaller AUM than larger.
Yeah, so basically you don't get weighed down by your own selling. Got it. Kirtan, thanks very much as always for simplifying the concept. I'm sure we can go on, and there's lots to discuss and debate on this topic, and we promise to take that up at a later stage. For now, let's take it that AUM alone is no measure of judging a scheme and whether or not it's a fit in your portfolio. We'll take a very quick break. On the other side, another popular topic, real estate investment trust, or REITs. Mrin Agarwal, a financial educator and director at FinSafe India, joins in. Stay tuned. Welcome back here with MF Corner. So I asked a lot of people on Twitter what they wanted to learn about, and I got a lot of requests from investors wanting to know about REITs or real estate investment trusts. Well, in its simplest form, a REIT is a vehicle which invests in real estate or property. So, it will buy one or two or few big properties which are beyond our budget and allow us a chance to benefit from the income generated by that or those set of properties by investing smaller amounts. But nothing is ever simple, right? So let me invite Mrin Agarwal, who's a financial educator and director at FinSafe India, to lay bare the workings of a REIT. Hi, Mrin. Good afternoon. Good to see you in the new year. So tell us, have you done a SWOT analysis of REITs? What do they mean for investors? What are the peculiarities? And, what class of investors are they suitable for?
Good afternoon, Samara. Nice to be here on the show today. REITs are fairly nascent in India right now, but given that the minimum amount for investment is being brought down to 50,000, it is becoming popular in the sense that more people are wanting to at least look at it. Now, obviously, it is easier to take real estate exposure through a REIT because of the amount that needs to be allocated is going to be much lesser. When you look at REITs, they also help you diversify. Buying one property on your own, you really won't get too much diversification. I think one of the other reasons that people are looking at REIT is because of the stability of income that can be expected from the REIT. So given that 80% of the portfolio needs to be invested in developed and income generating properties, and 90% of that income needs to be paid out on a regular basis, means that it's a good way to also get into an instrument if you're looking at some good regular income. So those certainly are the advantages of the REIT. So those are the advantages of the REIT.
Mrin, given the year that we had, 2020, practically everyone is working from home. You are too, I can see. Is there this whole outlook on commercial real estate seems pretty cloudy, right? We've just about started going to malls. They've just about started getting back on their feet. I don't know, what's the kind of rental income they're generating. Is this an environment in which REIT is still suitable? Is the outlook positive? We don't want somebody to put in 50 grand ahead and then only to find out that it's not doing so well.
Well, probably for maybe this year and maybe the next couple of years, there might be some impact. But I think, from the overall perspective of office space, and given that I live in Bangalore, where there's a very high demand from IT companies, I think, the overall long-term perspective is pretty good. Maybe on the short term, there might be certain issues. Although when you look at the two REITs and what they have said, they say that they have really not faced that many issues. But yeah, there might be some short-term challenges.
Okay, Mrin, how would a REIT differ from a debt mutual fund? Are they targeted at the same investor?
Well, I think first and foremost, of course, REITs invest in real estate, whereas debt funds invest in bonds. And clearly, REITs are meant for longer-term investors because when you invest into a REIT, it's pretty much for long term. You're not going to invest in it for a couple of months. So first and foremost is that. Secondly, when you look at the costs, debt funds today are extremely low cost. Even the longer term debt funds are very low cost, below 1% TER typically on debt funds. If you look at REITs, there's a 1% on the distribution and there's a 3% on the property management as well. So certainly costs are higher in REITs. Again, when you look at the tax structure, so there are 2-3 elements out here in a REIT. You would be getting dividends, there might be interest, and there might be repayment, and of course, capital gains when you exit. So each of them is taxed differently. So the dividends are tax-free. That is provided the REIT has not taken concessional taxation. The interest is taxable. Repayment, so let's say the REIT exits a property and makes a repayment, that is tax-free. I think all of this can get quite confusing. Also, when you look at the capital gains, so long-term capital gains kicks in after 3 years and it is taxed at 10%, whereas short-term capital gains is taxed at 15%. So I think, the tax structure is quite complex. There's a portion of the income that's going to be taxable. There's a portion of the income that's not going to be taxable, right? So this was really on cost and tax. I think when you compare the risks that are associated, one of the risks that could be there in a REIT could be the concentration risk, which is that the REIT invests only in a couple of properties. As far as debt funds are concerned, of course, SEBI has laid down guidelines on the exposures, limits that can be taken by debt funds in various categories. So clearly, I think the concentration risk could be a risk. Of course, the risk of the economic downturn and everything that you mentioned about, that may not be there in debt funds.
True, got it. Okay, Mrin, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we promised to, get you on the show again, and we'll do another more detailed chat on REITs. But for the moment, thanks very much for joining us. So that's about all we have in this edition of MF Corner, but it's time for the CNBC TV 18 Budget Quiz. Remember, there are prizes to be won every day. So here's today's question repeated for you. What was the budgeted earnings from the goods segment for Indian Railways in 1955-56? Those are all your options listed for you on the screen. Send us your answers on Twitter. Post your answer as a comment on the question tweet on the CNBC TV 18 news handle. Use the hashtag budget with CNBC TV 18. Hurry up and send in your answers because the winner will be announced very, very soon. Stay tuned. Closing bell is up next.